So I had to skip last week's review. I've been very, very busy welcoming a new little girl into my life. So as I said, good week for me, bad week for the channel. But I did get a chance to check out the last episode of the third day, and it was really confusing. I probably should have watched the 5th episode. Just kidding. I did watch the 5th episode. And overall, I feel that winter was not as strong as summer on a number of levels, and it kind of had the feeling of an unnecessary sequel. It wasn't that it was bad, it had its moments, but I feel that this 3-episode segment of the third day kind of lacked the atmosphere and the directorial flourishes that the first 3 episodes had. And I felt like what was going to be interesting was these were going to be 2 distinct halves of a story. And that really wasn't the case, because when it became obvious that this was going to include Sam in a substantive role, I feel that it undercut Naomie Harris and her character, because she was entering the story later in the game and we already have this emotional connection to Jude Law's Sam, which means that we're going to be paying more attention when he's on screen, and it kind of just kept her from coming into her own as a protagonist. And overall, I felt that this last 3-episode segment, because it was following a more traditional story structure, I felt like, one, it got rid of the ambiguity of the ending of the 3rd episode. I liked not really knowing what was going on with Sam, whereas, these 3 episodes make it very, very clear for the most part what was going on with Sam. And, it's not very surprising that he was delusional and that this isn't actually their son. That seemed to be something that a lot of people had theorized, and it makes a lot of sense given what we know about Sam. But I feel that the ambiguity of the first 3 episodes was just a lot more interesting than anything we got here. The story seems like it was in many ways ultimately about dealing with grief, and I think that was why, in a large part, Sam was a more interesting protagonist than Naomie Harris's character was in the last 3 episodes, in a large part because he had such a crazy response to his grief. He was allowing his grief to show. It was as Nico Parker's character tells her mother, at least he's showing something. Because to a large extent, Naomie Harris has to hold her grief within her because she's trying to live for her daughters. And this makes her a better person, but a less interesting character to watch on screen. Sam's unhinged nature just made him, I think, a lot more fascinating as a protagonist. And I think, Naomie Harris definitely had her moments in this series. I thought that her scene with the cowboy in episode 5, where he talked about how these women's job was to go and poke people until they were crying, and how you have to show your emotional reaction. It reminded me of another line from a different story, grief deserves to be felt. And that was very much the theme, I think, in these 3 episodes, is that Naomie Harris's character hasn't allowed herself to feel grief, hasn't allowed herself to show her grief, and her coming to terms with that was the core of this last episode. The scene where she finally, she sees her son that has been killed. She envisions him on the raft, even though he's not really there. I think this was her allowing herself to recognize his existence, allowing herself a moment where she just felt that overwhelming sense of loss. But then she goes on living for her daughters, and that final moment with the 3 of them huddled in the cold together with their arms around each other was very, very touching. I think that the themes of motherhood in this 3 episodes were very, very well wrought, and I think it was wise to have Philippa Lowthorpe direct these episodes. She brought a more sensitive touch to this. I also feel that Jess's evil turn was rather interesting. Katherine Waterston did a very, very fine job in this series. I felt like she showed a lot of acting range, but to a large extent, I feel that this turn didn't really feel earned, because there was this huge gap between episode 3 and episode 4, and we come back and she's just not the same character. And we watch her, trying to take over the island, and at some point she's become a fanatic. She completely believes in this. And in the first 3 episodes, she was a skeptic, and we weren't really shown how she got from there to here. And it seemed more an excuse for Katherine Waterston to do some evil acting and for there to be a more obvious threat in the back half of this series. And on the whole, I felt that this felt a lot more cliched and stereotypical of a plot line than what we got in the first 3 episodes. In the first 3 episodes, you think that there's this dark plot to sacrifice Sam a la Wicker Man, but eventually you realize what's actually going on and that they want him there because they think that he is a savior. He's a kind of a Christ figure, and that's a really interesting twist. Whereas this twist is a lot more obvious, that someone that seems evil is evil. I mean, it's not that surprising. And the fact that they, killed so many characters so brutally, say goodbye to the Martins, I felt like their deaths were very shocking and disturbing. And then let the main character's family go, or rather weren't going to kill them, we're going to allow them to stay on the island and live. That reeked of plot armor, that they wouldn't just kill off this entire family to protect her daughter's status as the future leader of the group on the island. I feel that there was a lot here that was just inconclusive that I found rather unsatisfying. I liked the moment where this child, who very obviously is not their child, says to Naomie Harris's character that she knew that she didn't mean it when she wishes she never had him. And that moment where you see her kind of feeling drawn in, where she sees the appeal of believing, despite the evidence, that this child is their child, and you wonder if she didn't for a moment consider joining Sam and staying on the island. But the realization is obvious that this isn't their child. Obviously, he's not the right race, not the right age, and that she makes this decision to continue living for their daughters and not to get carried away in this delusion. And I think they're obviously making some parallels between Sam's belief and the beliefs of the Islanders in the fact that Osi is the soul of the world and whether or not they're justified in that belief. So overall, these last 3 episodes, they weren't bad, but I didn't love them. I think that the first 3 episodes were very, very special. They were steeped in atmosphere, and they were really what drew me into this show. I liked Jude Law's Sam better as the central figure. I felt like there was a lot more interest there. And Naomie Harris did a good job, but I feel like having Jude Law in these last 3 episodes really undercut her and didn't really allow her to thrive as a protagonist in the same way that he could in the first 3 episodes. I would have rather that they had really just made these 2 bifurcated stories that had nothing to do with each other, because this ended up feeling like a lesser sequel, as I said. But those are just my thoughts for what they're worth. If you're interested in seeing more reviews like this one, please consider subscribing.